So, welcome to TGC. My name is Yasir Khan Kakad, and today we are going to discuss the recent BRICS summit in Kaza, Russia. We will be discussing its global implications, especially on the economy. And for this, we have joined by renowned political scientist, Dr. Mark Katz. Sir, thank you so much for joining the TGC.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Sir, as we know, you have very vast experience and knowledge on Russia and its policies, especially in the Middle East. Sir, I want to know how do you see BRICS expansion, especially the inclusion of Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt? How do you see it is a challenge for the G7 or IMF institutions, which is Western dominated?
Well, I think that, it's very interesting that Iran on the one hand and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates on the other have been rivals, but they both joined, although it's not quite clear if Saudi Arabia has really joined. It hasn't formally accepted its membership. So in a certain sense, they check each other, and that's not such a terrible thing, I think, from the point of view of the G7. So I don't really think that, it would be very different if it was just Iran. And in other words, if the BRICS was specifically, consisted of, totally anti-Western governments. But I think we see a big division within BRICS, that there are those, Russia, especially Iran, plus China, which are more anti-Western, and then there are others which cooperate with the West and wish to continue doing so. India in particular, but also Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. So I don't think, in other words, there's an internal contradiction within the BRICS that I think makes it very difficult for it to be effective.
Sir, how do you see strategic vision of BRICS? Do you think it's Russia's tool to counter Western sanctions? To use it as sir, we know US has imposed sanctions on Russia to make it diplomatic,
Right. Well, certainly I think that, the Russians, the Iranians, they've been able to avoid sanctions to, a certain degree. And obviously, the key is to the extent that China is willing to cooperate with them. That's the economic powerhouse, and if China is willing to, buy things from them, export things to them, then I think that the sanctions they can live. And I think the same with India as well. India buys a lot of oil, obviously, from Russia. I believe they buy from Iran as well. So I think this is, in other words, it's not a question of the BRICS as organization, but it's the individual economically powerful countries within it which are willing to work with Russia and Iran in particular that help them. Now, I think Putin had much higher ambitions with regard to somehow replacing the dollar system. It seems that China, India aren't so interested in this, but they may be able to set up their own, payment system. I think BRICS Pay is what they're trying to call it, as opposed to SWIFT. And we'll see how well it goes. The trouble, I think, is that a lot of Chinese banks that do more business with the West are not so interested. So there's some dedicated banks that just do trade with countries like Russia. They don't do trade with the West. But what it shows is that, despite the hostility between China and the West, China does a lot of business with the West, and it's not willing to give that up.
So how do you see their internal dynamics? As we know, India and China, they have a long-standing rivalry. How do you see India playing on both sides?
Yeah, well, we did see a meeting between Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi. So, it's looks like things seem to be cooling down. But of course, during the Cold War, we also had Soviet-American détente, that there are moments when relations were better, then of course they would get worse and whatever. And so I think that, right now, both China and India don't want to see the relationship between themselves get even worse. But that's a very different thing from actually improving the relationship. And I think that there's just basic differences between them, or their border issues in particular. And I think that India is very fearful of Chinese military presence in the Indian Ocean. They're very fearful of Chinese-Pakistani relationship in particular. So I think that, in other words, and that's a problem, Now, for the Russians, I think that they actually, typically for them, they think it's a good thing that there's this rivalry, because this would allow them to work with both, to navigate between them, even call for conflict resolution under Russian leadership, of course. But I think that what we really see with regard to the BRICS is that the two important members are, I think now, China and India, and Russia is not as significant a leader. In other words, it can't really set the agenda for BRICS the way I think that Putin had hoped to do.
What do you think, Professor? Do you think it's a real collaborative alliance between these countries, or they're just measure to counter dominated global order? Yeah, you can say global governance.
Yeah, well, I think that it's hard to be an alliance when you have significant differences within the alliance. China versus India. Also, in my view, Iran versus both the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. We also see Egypt versus Ethiopia. This is actually a fairly serious problem that's developing. It kind of makes one think, well, why did they admit them both? Why did they want to deal with this? And the thing is that BRICS doesn't seem to be able to do this. So I don't see it as an alliance. On the other hand, I do know that the idea of BRICS has captured the imagination of a lot of people in the global South. I was recently involved in a project, edited volume on the expanded BRICS by a number of African scholars in particular. And what really strikes me is just how enthusiastic a lot of people are. I think that the idea is that they want to, they hope that the BRICS is a means by which they can sort of reset the rules of international relations that the West has dominated things for too long. I guess the problem is that, well, what are the new rules going to be? In other words, no one's quite clear on what is it that this non-Western, I don't even want to say anti-Western, but non-Western global order going to look like. And that's the trouble. So everyone seems to think that, they don't want a Western global order, but what it is they do want is less clear. And I have the sense that it's, in other words, that the more that BRICS expands, the less clear it's going to be. And I think it's very interesting that this past June, the BRICS decided that they weren't going to admit any more new members for the time being. They have some 13 other nations or something like this. But that it's to me, it's very striking that, last year it seemed that they saw a great benefit to expanding BRICS, and now suddenly they don't. That it's and that why not? I think partly why not is that now with the expanded membership, that means everyone, all people would have a veto power over membership expansion. And so I think that it's going to be harder for them to agree on just who should be admitted.
So I just want to know, okay, how do you see the BRICS from the US, the government of the US and the academia, and how, like, do you think it's something alternative to G7 or some Western institutions such as IMF? Because these countries, they have some real concerns, especially Russia. Russia thinks US, use these institutions to squeeze Russia's economy in order to demotivate from military expansion in Ukraine. So I just think the countries in South Africa and Brazil, other countries, they think BRICS is an alternative for them, to totally rely on the US-led institutions.
Well, it's certainly possible. But I think, it just as the G7 depends on one leader, the United States, which others are willing to follow, I think the success of BRICS will be if there's one leader who others are willing to follow. And it strikes me that the principal candidate is China, that they have a lot of economic strength, and there are quite a number of countries, as the Economist recently pointed out, that more countries do more trade with China than with the United States. So the question is China willing and able to basically oversee an alternative economic system? And I think what's interesting is that I think that their own Belt and Road Initiative, that they themselves have become a little bit worried that it hasn't been as successful as they had hoped and spent more expensive. And, the real truth of the matter is that if you want to be a great power, you have to spend and spend and spend. That's just the reality of it, that there's people follow you up out of love because they're getting something for it in return. And I think the question is just how much can China afford this? And it seems to really insist on making a profit. And that's the thing. There's being a great power and making a profit.
Yeah.
Are not mutually consistent. Being a great power is not a profitable enterprise. And maybe they hope it's going to be, maybe we all do, but it really isn't. And so does China want to support all these nations? In other words, can they offer a better alternative to the World Bank and the IMF? Now, it seemed that, for a while that there would be this BRICS bank, or they had different financial institutions. But at the end of the day, it seems that either they're going to have terms similar to those of the World Bank. In other words, the World Bank sets terms, and IMF, not just arbitrarily, because there are actual reasons. So if they're going to do this, can they offer better terms? And what that means is China willing to carry countries more than the IMF and World Bank are? And I suspect that China really, at the end of the day, isn't willing to do so. So there's a tremendous, what I think is that what the BRICS might end up succeeding at is helping to sort of bark. In other words, certainly the World Bank and the IMF, these are Western-dominated organizations, and had other non-Western economies growing much stronger. They should have greater say in the running of these, and certainly in the leadership. Why is it that the IMF has always been led by a European? Why is it that the World Bank has always been led by an American? That doesn't have to be that way. And I think that if the Western countries are interested in forestalling the influence of BRICS, then they're going to have to make certain concessions. And I think that this would be one. I think that there can be kind of a bargaining process for a lot of nations, especially the ones that aren't so anti-Western. It's like, okay, you don't want us to go over to this new Chinese-dominated system. Well, then maybe you need to, address some of our concern. And I would hope that actually that would happen. So that's where I think the BRICS or membership in the BRICS could, in fact, make a difference. Now, for a country like Russia, which, under its current government, it's just not going to have good relations with the West, and the West is not particularly interested in making any, sort of concessions to Russia at present. And that's, I think, also, a problem for the BRICS. In other words, just how much are they willing to underwrite Russia? In other words, how do they benefit? Now, there's cheap oil, that's for sure. But that's the thing. In other words, Russia isn't really a source of funds. China is. Russia's not. In other words, how much do they really want to tie themselves to Russia? In other words, is BRICS really the best way for them to proceed? And I guess to that question, I think just like during the Cold War, was that the Soviet Union supported the Third World or Third World causes, but it wasn't a member of the Third World. Now Russia supports the Global South, but is it a member of the Global South? It used to be kind of North, but that's the thing. There's Russia. Is it really a Global South country? It wants to seem to claim so, and of course, leadership of this organization. But I think the real question is, do people in the Global South really see it as a leader? Do they want to tie themselves to Russia's?
This is why my following question: how do you see either this BRICS is the Global South representation? Are they doing the presentation of Global South or not? If they are, BRICS is, let's suppose, if BRICS is the representing Global South, then we know Russia is very weak, especially the war after war in Ukraine. So how do you see Russia's role being as a leader organizing this summit? Do you think Russia will be successful in implementing their policies, especially in geopolitics and development projects?
Well, I think it'll be hard. I think what we've seen is that while obviously the West has been disappointed that the Global South is not joined in supporting Ukraine's cause, I think that for the most part, Global South nations are not exactly supporting Russia. In other words, I think that for a lot of Global South countries, the conflict is an opportunity to make money. They're willing to hedge their bets. And to tell you the truth, what the behavior of many Global South countries reminds me of is 19th century American foreign policy, which was very successful at navigating great power conflicts, to its own benefit. In fact, to such benefit that eventually became a great power in its own right. But it strikes me that this is the kind of thing that many Global South countries are doing now. Certainly in the U.S. we don't like it, but to me it's perfectly understandable. Just because they don't support us on Ukraine doesn't mean they necessarily support Russia. And they're just still taking advantage of the situation. And I also think there's other dynamics. In other words, for India, for example, was that, okay, so the West doesn't like that they're buying all this cheap Russian oil. But if India doesn't buy it, then, and China does that make Russia just that much more dependent on China, which has, maybe not the friendliest attitude toward India? So I think that, India is actually doing this partly as a defensive maneuver. I think there is some understanding in Washington for this as well. So there's other dynamics than just Russia-West hostility. In fact, I think in a certain sense, in the 21st century, sort of that the main geopolitical rivalry could emerge as that between China and India. There's two most populous countries in the world, and they're right next to each other. Can you imagine that this is not a recipe for peace and harmony, it seems to me. And I think that one has to look at a lot of countries' behavior in terms of not so much what they think of the U.S. or Russia, but in terms of how they're dealing with their own regional rivalries and how the Ukraine war sort of affects that.
So I will be asking your last question. According to you, what are the issues in implementing, being all the members countries? You already mentioned one point, India and China, they have like rivalry, it's their internal dynamics issue. Also, there is one news coming from this summit that India is supporting Pakistan's, membership in BRICS. I don't know if it's valid news but there is rumors which are, in the media outlets. How do you see, what are the implementation issues in BRICS?
Well, that's an interesting question. I actually had not heard that before. As we saw with the expansion of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, India and Pakistan joining together. In other words, neither was in a position then to veto the other. And sort of BRICS sort of was formed, from this idea, that first the BRIC, and that, so India was sort of a founding member. And so then the question was, well, would they always use this to block Pakistan? And I think that, although obviously India and Pakistani rivalry is something that's taken place for a long time, I don't have to tell you that I think that an intelligent Indian foreign policy would be to try to accommodate Pakistan. In other words, if India treats Pakistan like an enemy, then Pakistan's always going to cooperate with China against India. Well, maybe what they should do is to be a little friendlier. And so I think that it would be wise for India to encourage things like Pakistan joining the BRICS, especially since it's not clear how medieval the BRICS is. There's not like it's going to really hurt India to do this. So I would think that this would be in India's interest, not because I think it would be in Pakistan's interest. It's just that it's in anyone's interest to be a member of BRICS. And then it's a question of pride, that if you're in Pakistan, why is India a member and why is Pakistan not? I think it's very interesting because if Pakistan was located in any other region of the world, it would be recognized as sort of a major power. Here's a country with a population larger than Russia's. It has nuclear weapons. So it really should be a lot more influential, but it just so happens that two of its neighbors are the most populous countries in the world. And so it doesn't look to be as big, but really it is an extremely important function. This is a question of both population and capacity. It is important. And so, I would think that including Pakistan would be a good idea. And I also think that, for the West as well, that sort of a love affair in the U.S. and India at the moment, but that I really think that we should remember what our forefathers during the Cold War, they went out of their way to court Pakistan, and there's always also trouble in that relationship, but I think it's better to have good relations with Pakistan than not.
Yeah, we have too much memories, especially in 1960s, when Pakistan used to be a broker state between the US and China. But I hope, inshallah, Pakistan and US will again build strong relations. But it's unfortunately, the relation between Pakistan and US is always used to be due to a third party, especially Afghanistan or terrorism. But I hope as soon as Pakistan develops its economy, US will be interested in Pakistan too. Sir, thank you so much for joining TGC. It's a very pleasure to talk to you and listen to your insightful views. Inshallah, sir, we will be listening to you once again. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Right, a fascinating conversation. I've been listening to some of your other videos. I think you